Russia is fined and told it faces disqualification from Euro 2016 if there's further violence from its fans. It comes as new footage emerges of fierce clashes between Russia and England supporters over the weekend. The ban will come into force if there's any similar violence at the stadium. We'll bring you the latest from our correspondents in France. Also this lunchtime, it's emerged that Omar Mateen, who carried out the worst mass shooting in recent US history, was a regular customer at the gay bar he attacked.
He was trying to pick up people, men. He's a homosexual and he was trying to pick up men.
Labour brings out its big hitters to try to persuade its supporters to vote to remain in the EU referendum. At the sentencing for murder of the athlete Oscar Pistorius, the father of the woman he killed speaks of his pain.
She must have been in so much fear and pain. That is what I think of all the time. I visualize that I can see it myself.
And the diamond-back moths, which could be devastating vegetable crops this summer.
Here in the south, Southern steams ahead with driver-only trains, despite the dispute with the unions. And the deal's finally done. Ronald Koeman leaves Saints for Everton.
Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. UEFA, European football's governing body, has fined Russia more than £115,000 for the behaviour of its fans at the Russia-England game on Saturday, and said the team will be disqualified if there's further violence in or near the stadium at any of its remaining matches. The chairman of the Football Association, Greg Dyke, has written to UEFA to express serious concern about security arrangements in Lille, where England and Russian fans will gather for this week's match. Downing Street says Britain is sending extra police officers to France ahead of Thursday's match with Wales. Well, Sally Nugent is in Paris for us now. Sally.
Yes, Rita, there is a potential flashpoint for trouble here in France this week. Russia play in Lille tomorrow, then the following day, Thursday, England and Wales play in Lens, just a short train ride away. The difference now is that Russia know if there's any trouble from their fans inside the stadium, they face the prospect of being thrown out of this competition entirely. The authorities here simply don't want a repeat of the scenes from Marseille at the weekend. Just a warning, you might find some of the pictures in Richard Lister's report upsetting.
Могла, не могла. Запомни, Сережа, все бабы дуры.
Russian men preparing for battle on the streets of Marseille. One of them is filming their progress. They roam the streets apparently looking for trouble. One man's armed with a metal pole, others throw chairs. Those in their way are brutally attacked. The man filming runs to take part in another assault, stamping on a rival fan who's been knocked to the ground. That moment appears to have been caught by a news cameraman on Saturday, the man in the striped shorts and his attack clearly visible. The rampage continues, with other victims left apparently unconscious. This man said he took part in some of the weekend's violence. Vladimir, who's Russian, said he'd been waiting 10 years for a chance like this. The teams of hooligans were big, and the lack of full intervention by the French police meant we could do everything, he said. Lille's preparing to host Russia's next game on Wednesday. England play in nearby Lens the day after, raising the possibility of more friction between the fans.
These guys could jump out of nowhere, and that's the single point that I think we have to be aware of. How we would protect ourselves from that, I've got no idea, which I suppose is a concern, yes.
Well, I suppose in previous tournaments where I've been, I would walk along to a non-England game wearing my England flag. I won't do that this time.
In a strongly worded letter to UEFA, the English Football Association said, "We've advised our supporters without tickets for the match in Lens to congregate there, and whilst we will be working hard to positively influence their behaviour, we have serious concerns around the security arrangements for the city." For the Russian team, UEFA have made the threat of disqualification all too real. They can stay only as long as their fans stay out of trouble. But many in Russia are scornful about such concerns. Igor Lebedyev, an MP and Russian Football Union official, said at the weekend, "I can't see anything wrong with fans fighting. On the contrary, well done to our guys. Keep it up." England is also on notice after the sentencing of 5 British fans for violence yesterday. The team is worried about the threat of disqualification.
It would be devastating. Our message is for everyone just to be safe and sensible, and by all means enjoy their day, enjoy the match, but be respectful.
After the weekend's trouble in Marseille, security is now being stepped up at the venues for Russia and England. Much is riding on what happens next, off the pitch as well as on. Richard Lister, BBC News.
Well, many British fans are expected to make the journey to northern France over the next 24 hours. And our correspondent Danny Savage is in Lille for us now. Danny, any sign of any extra security there?
Well, Sally, thousands of fans are pouring into Lille here. You've got Wales fans, England fans, Russian fans all coming together in this city. Yes, there is lots of security here at the moment. If you take a walk around the city centre, lots of the different squares have the police parked up in transit vans ready to deal with any trouble should it occur. So far, so good though. However, in the last few days there has been a little bit of trouble here in Lille, and these bars and restaurants behind me, tables and chairs went flying there on Sunday when Germany and Ukraine were in the city. So there was some trouble then, some arrests made, and security has been stepped up. Security is also very visible when you go round this city. And another thing that I've noticed here this morning is some English fans going up to Russian supporters to kind of put out the hand of friendship and have a chat with them and just check what they think this trouble is about. Do they think, as Russians, that there will be a load of troublemakers turning up? And I've talked to the Russian supporters as well. They think after what happened in Marseille, it will be fine. They think the French authorities are now on top of this. They think the Russian fans who caused the trouble are in a very small minority and will probably be picked up before they get here. And that really is the challenge for the French authorities, to stop that hardcore of Russian supporters getting here to Lille and causing trouble. And I think the authorities say that they're on top of it. The fans believe that as well. But the next 48 hours will be the make or break for this, whether this will be defined by events on the pitch or events off it.
Danny Savage in Lille, many thanks. And thank you too, of course, to Sally Nugent in Paris. Customers at the gay nightclub where Omar Mateen shot dead 49 people in Orlando say he himself had been a regular visitor to the venue. US authorities said Mateen pledged allegiance to so-called Islamic State shortly before the attack. President Obama has said the inquiry is being treated as a terrorist investigation, but added there was no clear evidence that Mateen was directed by IS. Well, let's go to our correspondent Laura Bicker, who's in Orlando for us now. Laura.
Well, the picture that's emerging of the gunman is a complicated one, and one that is the centre of this investigation. Meanwhile, thousands have gathered both here and right across the United States to show solidarity with the victims. And last night here, as dusk fell, a bell tolled 49 times, once for each of the victims.
The people of Orlando find comfort in one another as this city tries to ease its pain. Thousands gathered less than a mile from where 49 lives were lost in a brutal shooting many are still struggling to comprehend. Omar Mateen chose a popular gay bar as his target. Armed with an assault rifle and handgun, he started shooting in the early hours of Sunday morning. As police arrived, they forced the 29-year-old to retreat. In response, he took hostages. A bouncer at the club managed to find a way out. He took the risk of being shot to free others.
I wish I could save more, to be honest. There's a lot of people that are dead. There's a lot of people that are dead.
Police have released a full list of the names of the victims, among them a student, an accountant, a dancer, partygoers gunned down during Gay Pride Month at their favourite club. There are reports that Omar Mateen had visited the Pulse on several occasions, It's not known if he was scouting the venue as a target or if he was there for other reasons.
He was trying to pick up people, men. He's a homosexual, and he was trying to pick up men. He would walk up to them, and then he would maybe put his arm around them or something, and maybe try to get them to dance a little bit or something, and then go over and buy a drink or something.
He declared his allegiance to the Islamic State before carrying out mass murder. The FBI says there's no clear evidence his actions were directed by the terrorist group. The brutality of one man has affected so many lives.
This was an act of terror, but it was also an act of hate. This vigil is a call for defiance. It is a call for unity and tolerance.
We feel very bad for the families. Our heart aches for them. We abhor violence and wish this would never have happened.
I wish there was more that we could even do. Coming to things like this, it makes me feel like I'm part of the fabric of America and we're hurting together, you know.
Vigils were held across the US and around the world. The rainbow colours lit up Sydney Harbour Bridge and the Eiffel Tower in Paris. The people of Orlando are being reminded they are not alone. A message of hope after one of the darkest days in the city's history.
And that report there by Laura Bicker. A man who swore allegiance to so-called Islamic State has murdered a senior policeman and his partner near Paris. The French President François Hollande said the murder was incontestably a terrorist act. The attacker stabbed the officer to death and took his partner and their child hostage. The partner, a police official, was found dead, but the couple's 3-year-old child was rescued. Here's our correspondent Nick Beak.
This is where terror came to the front door of France's police. A 42-year-old commander murdered outside his family home. His wife, who also worked for the police, then taken hostage inside and stabbed to death.
Elite police quickly arrived at the scene and communication began. A plan of assault was also being developed. The negotiations did not succeed. It was decided to launch an assault. There were explosions.
The couple's 3-year-old son was also inside the house, but pulled to safety. Officers are said to have shot the attacker, who's thought to have posted a video online following the killings. He's been named by French media as 25-year-old Larossi Abala, who was reportedly jailed for terror offences 3 years ago. The so-called Islamic State group has claimed he was one of its fighters. The crime provoked this response from the French president.
This act was unquestionably a terrorist act, because on the one hand, the perpetrator who was killed by the security forces' assault himself wanted that this act should be interpreted as a terrorist attack.
France has been on high alert since the attacks in Paris last November, where 130 people were killed. A state of emergency remains in place. And France is now in the middle of a huge security operation to keep fans at the Euro 2016 tournament safe. This attack, more evidence of what President Hollande calls the significant threat the country faces. Nick Beak, BBC News, Paris.
The Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn has this lunchtime issued an urgent call to the whole Labour movement to campaign to keep the UK in the EU. He warned that jobs and workers' rights could be threatened by a Leave vote next week. Union leaders are also warning of public sector cuts. But Vote Leave said immigration put pressure on public services and couldn't be controlled from inside the EU. Our political correspondent Tom Bateman reports.
It is one of the most argued over questions in the referendum. Would a Leave vote hit our economy? Today, a warning from Labour about public sector jobs. The Labour leader joined union bosses to claim that more than 500,000 jobs could be lost after a vote to leave. A result, they say, of a new round of austerity due to a shrinking economy.
We want to defend the very many gains that we've made by trade unions across Europe that have brought us better working conditions, longer holidays, less discrimination, and maternity and paternity leave.
The warning comes on day 2 of the Labour In campaign's so-called Fight Back. The Remain side is nervous that lower income voters aren't getting their message.
One senior figure in the party told me that today's show of unity by the Labour movement is unprecedented, all in an attempt to try and hammer home their warning that Brexit could lead to mass job losses in hospitals and schools up and down the country. For the Leave side, though, it is immigration that is putting pressure on public services, and that brings them back to their core argument. They want you to see this as an argument about bringing power back here.
In a campaign that's seen Labour and Conservative politicians side by side at both ends of the debate, Vote Leave have rubbished today's claims about public sector job losses. They say it is EU membership that damages public services through migration.
We've borne this price of your open markets, with our wages being pushed down, of our children not being able to get houses, not being able to get them to the schools that we actually would like to get them into, of lengthening queues in the NHS, and the referendum day will be a day when they say is enough is enough.
The Outcamp today got the endorsement of Britain's most popular tabloid. Unsurprising perhaps, but a blow for Labour and the In campaign. A message on display as the Cabinet met this morning despite its differences over the vote in the strange politics of the referendum. Some of them may be looking to Labour's campaigning to ensure their survival. Tom Bateman, BBC News.
Well, meanwhile, ministers campaigning to leave the European Union say that present-day recipients of EU funding would get the same money if the UK votes to leave. They say EU funding for areas including farming, science and culture would be continued until 2020. Well, our political correspondent Chris Mason has been looking at the figures. Chris, talk us through them.
Yeah, Rita, the UK currently sends £14.4 billion to Brussels every year. Now, just under half of that figure comes back, as you say, for things like farming, fisheries, science and universities. And today, Vote Leave has said if we do come out of the European Union, the government should continue making those payments until 2020. So, what is left? It would leave ministers with £8.4 billion a year to spend. That figure is currently not spent in the UK. Now, during this campaign, we've heard from out-campaigners a range of things that money could be spent on. New roads, more school places. For instance, the In campaign described that as fantasy economics. Today, Vote Leave have narrowed down their focus and suggested an extra £5.5 billion could be spent every year, as you can see there, on the National Health Service, and £1.7 billion could be spent removing VAT from domestic fuel bills. Now, if you add those two numbers together, there is actually still money left over. But, and this is a very big but, all of this assumes the economy doesn't take a hit if we leave the EU, and most economists think it would.
If we were to leave the European Union, trade and investment with our EU neighbours would become more difficult. That would likely make the economy smaller. As a result, we think that you could be talking about £20 to £40 billion worth of takeaway required. So maybe a year or two extra of austerity, not giveaways, but takeaways in that scenario.
It's also worth remembering, Rita, that these suggestions come from a referendum campaign group. They are not currently in a position where they can make public spending promises. Therefore, the government and future governments to make, depending on how we vote next week.
OK, Chris, many thanks. Well, we can talk now to our assistant political editor, Norman Smith, who's at the Labour event for us now. And Norman, can Mr Corbyn persuade Labour supporters to back the Remain campaign, do you think?
Well, Rita, one of Mr Corbyn's shadow cabinet colleagues said to me after this event, we all felt a bit daft, a bit foolish, standing up here like a group of unruly school kids at an end-of-term photo. But the message they want to get over is that Labour is overwhelmingly united in favour of staying in the EU. And even at this late stage, they believe there are many, many Labour supporters who simply don't get that. One shadow cabinet member said to me he had had Labour supporters coming up to him and saying, "How are you going to vote?" The second thing Mr Corbyn wanted to do today was to press the button which all Labour leaders in difficulty press, which is the NHS button, warning that under Brexit the NHS would be at risk because of cuts of up to 25% in its funding. The problem is, what is driving the momentum of the Leave campaign is not concerns about the NHS, it's concerns about immigration. And on that, Mr Corbyn has had very, very little to say. Privately, however, some of his colleagues are now saying the party needs to come out and say a Labour government would campaign to reform EU free movement rules, that it would look to tighten up on border controls, and that other EU countries would also be sympathetic to that. The difficulty, very obviously, is that could be yonks away. Where Labour is now is it has just days left to convince its natural supporters not just that it's serious about the NHS, but that it's serious about immigration.
Norman, thank you. Well, tonight the BBC's Newsbeat is holding a debate in Birmingham for young people to put their questions on the issues to representatives from both sides of the debate. So you can catch that on Radio 1 or watch it at 9 o'clock tonight on the BBC News channel. Well, the time is 1:20. Our top story this lunchtime. Russia is fined and told it faces disqualification from Euro 2016 if there's further violence from its fans.
And coming up, Britain's love of modern art. Tate Modern is bursting at the seams. The answer is get an awful lot bigger. We're here for the first glimpse of the new extension, live at Tate Modern.
In South today at 1:30, Southern steams ahead with driver-only trains, despite opposition from the unions. And disability campaigners at the High Court, not happy that it's lights out in Reading.
Now, almost 100 years after she sank, divers are attempting to discover more about the fate of the Titanic's sister ship, the Britannic. Despite also being billed as an unsinkable vessel, the luxury liner ended up at the bottom of the sea when she was destroyed during the First World War. Our reporter Andrew Bomford has dived down to see her.
120 metres down on the Aegean seabed, a forgotten secret has been hidden for 100 years. Looming in the dark blue depths is the grave of the gigantic ship Britannic, Titanic's bigger and better sister, sunk by a German mine. Up above, on the ship U-boat Navigator, deep divers are about to descend. At 400 feet down, it's a challenging and dangerous dive. 2 state-of-the-art submersibles will join them in the deep to analyse the wreck. The divers call her the Everest of the dive world, the biggest ship to be sunk in the First World War.
Can you imagine the ship crash into the seabed, the noise and the violence of it? We're 120 metres deep. The thing was longer than that, so when it sank, the bow was actually hitting the seabed and the stern was still out of the water. Poking your head inside to have a look, lots and lots of things, glassware intact, beautiful lamps inside, crockery still there, preserved.
Keeping watch is the British owner of the wreck, who bought it from the UK government.
It's a very unusual thing to sort of say that you actually own a shipwreck. It's the Titanic connection. It just draws people in, and you are looking at a far better preserved version of the Olympic-class liners in Britannic than, say, Titanic.
Diving down in the submersible, the light slowly fades, turning everything the deepest blue. And then, out of the dark, there she is, a sleeping giant.
It's the most awe-inspiring sight I've ever seen. She's just enormous, this truly titanic sleeping beauty lying here on her side at the bottom of the ocean. But yet the detail, you can see everything down here like a time capsule for 100 years.
It's amazing, it's interesting, it's cool, it's dangerous.
Divers swim through a giant tear in the hull.
Now the divers are looking into the entrance to the engine rooms.
Britannic was a luxury liner, refitted as a hospital ship for the First World War Battle of Gallipoli when disaster struck. But miraculously, unlike Titanic, only 30 people died. Still down here are the handrails, glass windows, floor tiles, even the captain's bathtub, a home now for sea life. Andrew Bomford, BBC News, Kiev in Greece.
The father of the murdered South African model, Reeva Steenkamp, has been giving testimony in court for the first time since she was shot dead by the athlete Oscar Pistorius 3 years ago. Barry Steenkamp was in tears as he said he thought of his daughter every hour and that Pistorius must pay for his crime. The athlete is being sentenced for murder after the original verdict of manslaughter was overturned on appeal. Karen Allen reports from the court in Pretoria.
Oscar Pistorius heading back to court. His fate still unclear. But all eyes today were on Barry Steenkamp, the father of Reeva, Oscar's girlfriend, the woman he killed.
Do you swear that the evidence...
Looking fragile and still in poor health, Mr. Steenkamp delivered an emotional testimony. He told the court he thinks of his daughter every day, calls her name out loud. He can't sleep. Then, pausing for breath, he spoke of the terrible moment his wife June broke the news to him during a confused phone call.
That's when I started the panic. And then driving home, I realised more and more Reeva's been killed. It hit me then. It's like it happened yesterday.
Unfortunately, I have to take it. When the prosecution asked what pictures he'd seen of Reeva after her murder, he said he'd seen just one. But he wanted the world to see them, making this appeal.
What I would like the world to see are the wounds inflicted onto Reeva and the pain that she must have gone through.
A nervous and exhausted Oscar Pistorius looked on, at times holding his head in his hands. Reeva's father's powerful testimony has revived some of the raw emotion witnessed at the original trial. He told the court he would like to meet Oscar Pistorius someday, but not now. He said he may have been forgiven, but he's not been exonerated. Oscar Pistorius has been portrayed both as a broken man and a man prone to bouts of aggression. Now, in preparing the sentence, the judge must decide. Karen Allen, BBC News, Pretoria.
Scientists are warning that cabbage, broccoli and cauliflower crops could potentially be devastated by an infestation of a species of moth arriving from continental Europe. Researchers are describing the diamondback moths as a super pest resistant to some common insecticides. This exclusive report by our science correspondent, Palab Ghosh.
A morning's work for the caterpillars of the diamondback moth, ravaging a cabbage within hours. Now they're all set to do the same to crops across Britain. They've been swept in by strong winds from continental Europe. And each female moth will lay up to 200 eggs.
The eggs will hatch, the caterpillars' larvae will emerge underneath the leaf, and they'll be continuing to munch their way through, and they will desecrate this crop right down to the stalks. That's all there will be left.
Scientists have been monitoring these moths in traps all across the country.
Well, normally I'd expect maybe one or two of these at most in the night, but this last couple of days we've caught, along with other things, maybe 50 or so.
Tens of millions of these moths have arrived in the past few days, so you're going to be seeing a lot more of them. They're going to devastate crops all across the country, but what's really worrying is that they're resistant to insecticides. So what, if anything, can be done? The scientists here are putting the caterpillars on leaves soaked with every single insecticide they can think of.
What we will aim to do is screen samples of these moths for their response to insecticides and see if this strain has an Achilles heel, if we can control it with a certain compound or two.
Are you hopeful?
I am hopeful that we might find something, yes, but if we don't, then it's going to be very tricky for the growers this particular season.
Cabbages, cauliflowers and broccoli all will be damaged by the caterpillars. Farmers won't be able to sell their crops, and those that are unscathed will be expensive. For the scientists, it's a race against time to find an effective insecticide. Palab Ghosh, BBC News, Harpenden in Hertfordshire.
Now, when Tate Modern opened its doors 16 years ago, critics wondered whether modern art would really draw in the crowds. In fact, it's one of the UK's top 3 tourist attractions, with over 40 million visitors since it opened. Now, the gallery is expanding with a massive new extension designed to showcase artists whose work is normally overlooked. Our arts correspondent, David Silito, is there for us now. David.
Well, one of the most interesting things about modern art is it just seems to get bigger and more spacious, and it requires bigger galleries to absorb it. But more than that, when this place started, people wondered, would they come in then huge numbers? Well, they have, 5.7 million, which is about twice the number they were expecting. So the answer, well, if we have a look at the outside of this building, you realise what we're actually walking inside. It is a giant rear extension to Tate Modern. It's described as being sort of like a crumpled ziggurat, those strange sort of warped forms, 10 stories high, filled with large gallery spaces, and now we walk into, well, this is floor 4, Simon Baker of the Tate. Why is it so much bigger and more spacious than what we thought was a very large gallery, the original Tate Modern, just over there?
Well, there's a lot of new kinds of spaces, new kinds of galleries. There's big spaces for performance. There are spaces especially for education, for people to get involved with what's happening at Tate. And also there's a lot more public spaces. There are spaces to move around.
We're walking into one of these at the moment, because one of the things about it is the huge numbers of people. They were bumping up against one another. It's a more comfortable experience, isn't it?
Yeah, we want people to enjoy themselves, spend time here, enjoy the public spaces, enjoy all the things that the museum has to offer, and in comfort.
And also a chance for people to sort of sit around. It's a social space, isn't it, as much as coming to see the art?
Yeah, I mean, it's always been a space where people have enjoyed coming, bringing their children, spending the day, and I think it's really important that they can do that with some space around them and enjoy their experience. Yeah.
Simon Baker, thank you very much indeed. And one of the most fascinating things of the research they did was that people, yes, they do come and look at the art, but they also, just as much it seems, come to do a bit of people watching, where you've got the perfect space here.
Yes, indeed. David, many thanks. David Sillito there. Time for a look at the weather now. Here's Peter Gibbs. Peter.
Thanks, Rita. Actually, nature painted the skies in dramatic fashion today. The big storm clouds are gathering once again. This picture sent in from one of our weather watchers in Shropshire just a little while ago. The clouds are building and the rain is coming down. And there's some thunder in the mix too, particularly at the moment across North Wales, down through the West Midlands. 1 or 2 thunderstorms popping up across the southeast of England as well. And that's going to be the main zone, I think, that's going to see some of the heaviest of the downpours through the rest of this afternoon. So quite a high risk, actually, of seeing 1 or 2 problems as a result. Some flash flooding in places with as much as an inch of rain potentially perhaps falling in the space of an hour or just a little more. Big changes, meanwhile, for the northeast of Scotland. Still lovely across Shetland, as it has been for a few days, but rain pushing in around the Moray Firth. The rest of Scotland, a lot of dry weather around. Northern Ireland too, a largely fine afternoon. But then we find that area of heavy downpours across a good part of Wales, the Midlands, stretching across increasingly into East Anglia this afternoon and across those southeastern counties of England as well. Southwestern areas probably escaping the worst of it. But even through this evening into the nighttime period, we'll keep some of those heavy downpours going, just slowly easing away. A wet night too across the northernmost parts of Scotland. Turning quite misty once again across southeast Scotland and northeast England later on in the night. So a bit of a grey start to the day here. But tomorrow, well, it's a similar day in many ways. Again, seeing some very heavy downpours building up as temperatures slowly rise. Wales, Midlands, many southern parts of England, probably not the southeast tomorrow, but like recent days, in amongst the showers, if you can get some sunshine, not feeling too bad at all, but another rather wet day for northern Scotland. It's low pressure that's bringing the very unsettled conditions at the moment. Tightening isobars, you'll notice, across northwestern areas into Thursday. So quite a cool breeze actually blowing in across a good part of Scotland, Northern Ireland particularly. Still a mix of sunshine and showers across much of England and Wales, but perhaps not as many showers, not quite as heavy as they have been over recent days. That's not the case over France, though. Here, the showers really building, and there could be 1 or 2 around for those big games on Thursday. But coming back home, and for Friday, still can't rule out the odd shower across England and Wales, but generally a lot more in the way of dry weather around. Still a cool breeze, though, across northern parts. High pressure is what we need to settle things down, but it's staying away to the southwest across the Azores. But a relatively quiet weekend. Most of us will get at least 1 fine day this weekend before more cloud and rain pushes in towards northwestern areas during the second half of the weekend. That's the forecast, Rita.
Thank you, Peter. Now, a reminder of our top story this lunchtime. Russia is fined and told it faces disqualification from Euro 2016 if there's further violence from its fans. Well, that's all from us. Now on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.